Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, advocacy and insights for trucking accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we have a very special guest. We have Johnny Bond with us. Johnny, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Kevin.
And Sagi, welcome.
Thank you. I always love your intros. They're so awesome.
Oh, well, yeah, talking you up. Of course you will. So today you guys are going to talk about a pretty interesting situation out there. I believe it was a Pennsylvania and it was a plane crash and a helicopter crash. So I'll let you guys take it from here, and I'm excited to listen in.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So, Johnny, thanks for coming on the show. Can you tell, the members of the people who are listening here, tell us a little bit about you. I know you're a DC lawyer that does personal injury, but tell us a little bit about your practice so we have an idea before we talk about this airplane crash of who you are, and so they get a feeling. I mean, I know you as a friend, and I know you're a badass lawyer. So just tell them a little bit about yourself so they can get up to speed on who you are and, why they should listen to you.
Sure. Interestingly enough, I didn't start my practice in the personal injury space. It starts off in the commercial and mergers and acquisitions side of the law. But shortly after starting in the corporate America legal world, I got a real itch for not personal injury, but civil litigation. And I switched over from commercial transactions, did a complete 180, and I left corporate America, started off in civil rights litigation. I did that, and that involved some 1983, 1981 civil rights cases, police brutality, excessive force. And along with the civil rights practice, as you can imagine, there were also personal injury cases that came into the firm. I worked with Donald Temple. He's a notable DC trial civil rights attorney. We worked together. We had cases with the likes of the Johnny Cochran firm, catastrophic cases where their lives had been torn up and thrown upside down by the negligence of others. And that's when I got to see that as a personal injury attorney, we have an opportunity to really help people when tragedy has struck them and turn their lives upside down. And the passion that I had directed into the civil rights space just automatically flowed into the personal injury space as well. And so over the years, and I've been practicing in my own practice, the Bond Law Firm, for over 20 years now. And so that's been a mix of personal injury as well as civil rights. And more recently, as we're going to talk about today, we've started to get involved as well as into the aviation law.
Right. I remember you told me you have a case. We're not going to get into the details because it's active against American Airlines, but I do want to talk about, handling airplane crash cases. I have two right now that it was a crash that went down in Mexico and we filed in Palm Beach. But here you have a crash in DC, and we've heard about it. I believe it was on January 29, 2025. But you were in DC. Can you give us a little bit about your perspective and what you know? Just give us a little background on it, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Look, it was heartbreaking. I can't tell you how many times I've flown in from somewhere into DC, flying right into Reagan National Airport and thinking about everything I was going to do when I got home. And the moment I heard the news and I saw it in a tragic day, I put myself in the shoes of everybody who was on that flight. I put myself in the shoes of everyone who was waiting on their loved ones to land and come home. And it was particularly heartbreaking because it's here in DC, and you just don't expect that to happen in a place like that. You've got the Pentagon across the street, you've got the nation's capital, you've got everything going on in that area, and you just don't believe that something like that would happen. So it struck home on a different level, I would say. you hear about those things in the news in different cities and your heart goes out, but I think it hits differently when it's home.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's something sort of related to when we get hurricanes down here in South Florida. The rest of the country doesn't really feel it, but it really hits home. So now we're talking about airplane crash cases, and I've handled some in the past and handling some now. The one that went down in Mexico, like I said earlier. How do you go about identifying? We've heard in the news, they're saying something about the helicopter, the military helicopter went into the jet, but for people who have never, or the average person who's not a lawyer, what should they be looking at with these types of cases? Like who is the at-fault party? Are there limitations? That kind of stuff. Give us a little background if you could.
Sure. So it's interesting. There were about 64 people on that flight, and unfortunately, they all passed, as we know. But what each individual would need to do would depend on where they started their trip. So if it's a domestic flight, that will be governed by typical standard negligence laws in the state for the given state. For instance, this would be in Virginia, so the statute of limitations and those types of things would apply. But then, as well as if it was an international flight, that's governed by a totally different law. So it's governed by what's called the Montreal Convention, and that is a convention treaty among different countries. And so that has a different process and a different jurisdiction. So you would need to file that in federal court, and then different laws, obviously different protocols apply. And we can get into the nitty gritty of that if you want, but you've got to think about where you started, whether it's a domestic or an international flight, and then follow the trail from there.
Gotcha. So if it was good, do we know where that flight was coming from? I don't remember off the top of my head.
It's a domestic flight.
Okay, so it's a domestic flight. Let's say a survivor's family contacts you. Where would you, tell us first, where would you bring the claim? You're in D.C. In my mind, I'm thinking you can bring it in D.C. because American pretty much does business in every state that I know of.
Right.
So where would you bring it?
Well, there you have a choice of venue. You could bring it in a federal court that was convenient for the plaintiff because you have federal jurisdiction, or you could bring it here in D.C. I would probably want to bring it in D.C. because my law offices are located here. I'm familiar with the judges. I'm familiar with the juries. But there's other reasons why you might want to consider bringing the case in a more favorable jurisdiction.
Who would be entitled to bring these cases when you have a wrongful death like it happened here? It seems like, again, I'm not making judgments. Just by what I read online, it looks like it was the military helicopter that seems to be at fault. So the government. So who can bring the claim on behalf of a person that passed away? So who would be able to bring that claim? What are the victims looking for? Who can come? Let's say they contact you. Who's going to be contacting you? And what do they? Just go ahead and tell us that.
Yeah, unfortunately, in this case, they would have to bring a wrongful death action on behalf of the estate of the deceased. So what that involves is establishing an estate for the deceased, and then the personal representatives who represent the estate would want to bring the action. Also, the survivors, so there would be children, parents of the deceased would also be able to bring actions on behalf of themselves for the losses that they'll sustain from the result of the death. That's the first step.
If you're filing in federal court and you got this federal case going on against the government, would you also file against American too? Or is this strictly, you think, against the case against the government for the helicopter, getting in the way of the American Airlines flight that was about to land?
That's a really good question. And a lot of people who are following the facts of this case would automatically think that because the helicopter was flying at about 100 feet higher altitude than it should have been, that it was probably the helicopter's fault, which would mean you'd want to sue the federal government. You'd have to file a suit against the federal government under the Federal Torts Claim Act, which obviously, for a lot of different reasons, the federal government has caps and different rules about how much the government will be liable for. But the query doesn't end there. There is, as you can imagine, a lot of sophisticated technology in the American Airlines flight. So I wouldn't count them out as a defendant. There are probably things that they could have done in split seconds. You've got to understand a lot of incidents that we probably don't know about when we're flying on a lot of these flights fall into very dangerous territory, but the captain and the crew are able to make split second decisions to keep us safe. And I wouldn't outlaw or forbid some type of claim against American for what they possibly could have done in the very few seconds or what type of notice they received. So what we have to do is a very exhaustive investigation into the data that they were receiving, what American Airlines could have communicated to the pilots, what maneuvers they could have taken to evade the incident. So it's not just against the federal government, and that's where you want very competent legal counsel to be able to investigate those factors and see if there is a claim that can be brought against American Airlines.
And that makes total sense. So let's turn your attention before American Airlines, you're bringing the case against the federal government. I know when we've brought cases in the past against the federal government, you have to fill out that Form 95 form. Anything specific that someone who wants to bring a claim that they need to know? Like I'll give you an example. When we had cases that we filed against the government for their negligence, one of the tips that I know to always follow is you have to put an amount on Form 95 that says the amount you're looking to collect. And so a tip that I would say for anybody who's litigating or thinking about litigating a federal case in federal court against the federal government is when you fill out that Form 95, make sure that you put the amount of money that you're seeking. So don't just put on a case like this, $1 million or 10 million. I would put some astronomical amount. Doesn't mean that's the amount you're going to get, but you're going to be limited to that amount of money. So if you just put down $1 million and the trial judge gives you 50, they're going to reduce it down to $1 million. So my tip would be on Form 95 is make sure that you put a super large amount. You can always ask for less, but you can't get more. Any tips that you can share with our viewers on completing that Form 95 and how important it is for someone who's handling one of these cases or comes across a case like this?
I'd follow up right there with you, Sagi, on that. One strategy that we always do is, as you said, include an astronomical amount so that whatever it does come out for a verdict won't be reduced. What we found success with is being very sincere about the types of losses. If it's a death, I mean, there is no amount of money that can bring that person back and restore that person's life back into the loved ones who've suffered that loss. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid to put a number out there. But if you don't do that, then obviously you'll be prejudiced and you'll get less than what you deserve.
Okay. So, and now we talked a little bit about the federal government. You may have a case against them. You may have a case against American Airlines. Are there deadlines that they would have to follow, file these cases by that obviously we want people to come, sign up as soon as possible because you don't want to wait to the last minute. But is there a deadline that people should be aware of before it's too late for them to bring one of these cases?
Yeah, I would follow. One thing that we do is we look at where the event occurred. In this situation, they were in airspace in Virginia. There's always going to be an argument that because it happened in Virginia, Virginia law applies, as well as under the Montreal Convention, you would want to stick with that state law just to avoid any problems. So I would look into the state of where the location of where the incident occurred, use that as a base. And then there's always other avenues that we want to look at in terms of what other jurisdictions may apply and then follow those statutes of limitations. But the key here is always to act as quickly as possible. As you know, Sagi, we don't wait until the deadline. We don't wait until the statute of limitations. In some medical malpractice statutory frameworks, you've got to give notice. You don't have to worry about that. The main thing is to get the lawsuit filed. Obviously, with situations like this, and such a devastating incident and the magnitude of it, there's a lot of activity and a lot of cases will be filed. I mean, unfortunately, you've got deaths. There's nothing much more to do in terms of trying to figure out what the damages are. The damages are death. So you want to get those cases filed as quickly as possible. In Virginia, there's a 2-year statute of limitations. So that's what I would look to for this, as well as I think for the Montreal Convention, you would also want to apply the Virginia state statute of limitations.
All right. So if you have one of these cases, what you want to do is you try to get it to a lawyer right away. Don't wait to the last minute because you could be jeopardizing yourself. Now, do you see these cases eventually resolving? Do you think they'll need a trial? How do you see whether it's American or the government defending these types of cases? Is this something that's going to be, they come forward to the table and come to a resolution? Obviously, the passengers on the flight weren't at fault, but what would you think would happen in these types of cases?
I think, let's start with American Airlines on that. I think American Airlines obviously would be very amenable to settling this as quickly as possible. Obviously, no attorney representing any company is going to just lie down and write a blank check. However, I think they would be more likely to want to settle quickly for a lot of different reasons. The federal government is a different animal. So it's not that they will be dispassionate, but there are, as you can imagine, it's a lot of different cases that the federal government will see. I think they'll be reasonable in this circumstance simply because you've got most of the blame focused on the helicopter. So I think they'll be reasonable. I just hope that they'll take into full consideration the harm and the grief that the parents and the loved ones and spouses are suffering at this point.
Yeah, well, let's see what they do. I know a lot of the states have been impacted. I think there was one individual from Florida who was on that flight. So, and there were people from people from, they were training for the Olympics, I heard as well. So there's people from all over the country and the world that were on that flight. And it's a shame. And let's not forget the people in the helicopter too. They were there as well. So it's good information. Thank you for sharing and giving us the 411 on this crash. And hopefully the people you're helping out, will get the resolution that they deserve and justice for what happened to them. Appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. Hopefully we'll have you on again, continue to, enlighten people and also maybe talk about, some of the cases you've handled so we can get more detail on that and what's going on in the DC area.
Well, look, I'm on the Sagi Shaked show, so, I stand in your shadow, but we do have some interesting cases going on. The case that I have right now against American Airlines, I can't really talk about the details, but, one thing that's important, as we spoke about today, it's important to get with legal counsel quickly. That case was with an attorney who signed it up and just simply didn't know what was going on. Fortunately, the client found me and we were able to get it filed before the statute of limitations. So I would say don't sit on your rights. Do some investigation to figure out if you can find a knowledgeable attorney to get involved. And look, Sagi, I've listened to your podcast, so I'm still ripping tips from you.
So, but seriously, if anybody has a case in DC or needs a lawyer that knows what they're doing and is skilled and experienced, Johnny Bond's the guy. So feel free to contact him. And thanks again, Johnny, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Johnny, we'll talk after this about the Johnny Bond show. We'll see if we can compete with the Sagi Shaked show. Pit you guys against each other. Well, thank you all for listening to Road to Recovery with Sagi Shaked. If you want to get in touch with Sagi, head to shakedlaw.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And Johnny, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you being here. And Sagi, thanks so much for being here as well.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.